It's our purpose to bring to bear the principle of common sense and rational discussion to the issues of our day. America was created at a time of great turmoil, tremendous disagreements, anger, hatred. There was a book written in 1776 that guided much of the discipline of thinking that brought us to the discovery of our freedoms, of our God-given freedoms. It was Thomas Paine's Common Sense, written in 1776, one of the first American bestsellers, in which Thomas Paine explained by rational principles the reason why these small colonies felt the necessity to separate from the powerful Kingdom of England and the King of England. He explained their inherent desire for liberty, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and he explained it in ways that were understandable to the people, to all of the people. A great deal of the reason for America's constant ability to self-improve is because we are able to reason, we're able to talk to each other, we're able to listen to each other, and we're able to analyze. We are able to apply our God-given common sense. So let's do it.
If you're tired of reading about other people getting rich in the stock market, this might be a good day for you.
Welcome to Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense. Today's episode is going to concern $5.3 billion in foreign aid that was given to Ukraine that is unaccounted for to this day. And $3 billion of that $5 billion at least is clearly your money, taxpayers' money, United States money. This issue arose a long time ago, and that would be back in December 19 of 2017, during the Obama administration. We brought it to light in December of 2019, meaning I did. I came back from the Ukraine with the document that proves it. And then again, we did it with a podcast. In fact, I think there were episodes 9, 10, and 11, which we'll refer you to the relevant portions of. But so far, there appears to be no answer to this. And certainly on the American side, nothing effective done about it. And it's very strange because this is one of the things that concerns all of us Americans, which is what happens with our foreign aid. We know that some of it goes for good purposes. We know that some of it goes for bad purposes. And we know some of it is stolen. But this is a large sum of money, $5.3 billion. It was smack in the middle of the Obama administration. And most importantly, it was right during the time that Joe Biden was appointed point man, both for distributing billions of dollars to the Ukraine, but also making sure that it was spent accountably. In other words, they weren't stealing it. He was appointed to lessen the corruption in the Ukraine. We know from prior episodes and proof, which is now about that high, that Biden certainly wasn't reducing corruption in Ukraine. He was adding to it with the $10 to $14 million bribe that he and his son took. And that is also proven in the podcasts we have in the past and being ignored by the cowardly politicians in the United States and the corrupt press. But how we can avoid trying to find out what happened to this $5 billion is, to me, almost as big a question. And maybe it'll be a little easier to get people to go look at this when they have cold feet in looking at Biden, even though Biden looks to be involved for decades in a massive bribery racketeering scheme with his family. So let's focus on the $5.3 billion for a moment. And let's take you back through it. And then I'm going to ask you to go back and look at some of those podcasts in the past, sections of them, where you will see even more of the proof, for those of you who want to go into more detail on it. But for those of you who want just an outline, this will suffice. So it's all based on a report of December 19, 2017. Here's the report.
Do you know you can reduce your electricity bill by up to 65% and at the same time be less reliant?
This was given to me in Ukraine by a member of the parliament. It's public. This is not any longer a private document. At the time it was given to me, it may have been a private document, but certainly not now anymore. And I'll summarize it for you. Of course, it was written in Ukrainian. This is my English translation of it. And I will put a copy of this on my website so you can read it. Really, the first page kind of summarizes the whole thing. It says that beginning in 2015, there were 440 projects that had international technical assistance in the Ukraine. These projects with a cost of over $5.2 million. Actually, it's 5.2 billion. It's incorrectly described the first time it's described as 5.2 million. And it says that as of July 1st, 2017, again, in the Obama administration, still quite a bit before the Trump administration, the number of going international technical assistance projects had decreased to 390, while their total cost had increased to 5.3 billion. However, now these are the things wrong with it, and I'm going to summarize this part. The assistance was not focused on the strategic directions defined by the government. In other words, the money was not given for the reasons that Ukraine asked, but for the reasons the United States decided it would give it. Which actually, if this were legitimate, would sound okay, but let's see what happens. The results of the implementation of a significant number of projects did not meet certain priorities of the socioeconomic development of Ukraine. That's shorthand for they were for purposes that were not very important. Even worse, the effectiveness of the implementation of these projects, the effectiveness of the use of financial resources has never been evaluated. They've never done an accounting of it. In other words, these are 300 and something different programs, and therefore the flow of the money has never been audited. In other words, we haven't determined, has it gone even for the incorrect purpose that it was intended? Let's say to buy 2 new headquarters for one of the law enforcement agencies. Did those 2 new agencies actually get built? The Ministry of Economic Development and Trade of Ukraine, as a coordinator of activities in the field of attracting and using international technical assistance, did not ensure any proper and complete accounting for international technical assistance. And then it goes on to say that they cannot account for the money. You could describe it several different ways. Given the language difference when we talked to the witnesses, some of them said it was missing, some said unaccounted for, some said part of this was stolen, but nobody knows what happened to it. That's a lot of money to not know what happened to. But then it gets worse than that, and we'll go into what this money is all about quickly, very shortly. But let me explain what happened to this. So when this got to the Ukraine government, it would be the government of President Poroshenko, who I don't think it is at all disputable, was a major crook. I mean, he lost 70-30 because there wasn't a single person in Ukraine, including his own family, that didn't know he was the biggest thief in the Ukraine. The second biggest thief in the Ukraine was Loshevsky, and he was Hunter Biden's boss, and he was the one that provided the Biden family with millions and millions of dollars. I mean, rather strange that the vice president's family is being paid by the second biggest crook in Ukraine. But the biggest crook in the Ukraine was the president. He put his nose into every deal. However, the president looked at this one, and this is probably one that he didn't put his, I don't think he was taking American foreign aid. He was taking much bigger amounts, mostly bribes. And he thought, well, my goodness, when the U.S. finds out about this, of which $3 billion of their money is not accounted for, and the fact that no matter what, this could be a big domestic political problem, particularly for Joe Biden, who then was thinking about running for president. Remember, he started to run against Hillary. He got like 1%, and he dropped out. So he thought we better have an audit of this. But maybe they even could come up with a phony explanation for it, which they were well known for. So he ordered the police to begin investigating it to see if they could patch up some of this $5.3 billion with something legit. I think this is a good time to take a short break. Here where I live in New York City, you spend a lot of money on these. The U.S. and Ukraine are friends. You can listen to very shortly.
Did you know that people can steal your entire house from right underneath you?
This is happening. After the audit began, there was a visit from the U.S. Embassy, which, as you know from prior knowledge, and some has come out since then, was entirely crooked and run for the benefit of Obama and Hillary as a sort of private political office, and by George Soros. The embassy officials showed up to see the police and told them that there was no need to really investigate this because we're friends. The U.S. and Ukraine are friends. So friends don't have to worry about, I guess, $3 billion missing or being stolen, even though it's not their money. It's the money of the American taxpayers. And this will give you a sense of what little regard the Obama administration had for your money. The police officers said, or the counting officers who were like police officers, oh, but we've been ordered to investigate this, and this is good for your government if we can find out, you know, you could get some of it back, or it could go for the right purpose, like helping people with drug addiction, or helping people that are impoverished, or helping with the effort against Russia. And then the embassy officials got a little more insistent. No, we don't need an investigation. We trust you. This is the weirdest thing in the world, right? They're trying to recover our money, and we're telling them no. And we ultimately tell them no, and it goes right up to the upper reaches of the embassy. And then eventually the president of the Ukraine tells them, stop the investigation. The Americans don't want us to do it. So now you have to be scratching your heads at home like I did. Why would America ever say, don't investigate the loss of $3 billion American dollars? I think you probably figured it out, right? Because if you investigated this, according to Mr. Teleshenko, whose testimony is all tape recorded, and I'm going to point you to it. You can go see it. It's a little snippet. According to Mr. Teleshenko, if this ever was revealed, a lot of people in Ukraine would go to jail, and a lot of Democrats in Washington would go to jail. Poroshenko was kind of holding this up so he could shake down Zlochevsky for some real money, which he got.
Yes, he did.
Poroshenko was paid off in this case.
Of course. There's other witnesses who could prove it.
And is that the reason why there's such reluctance in Ukraine to really dig into this case, and that it's going to uncover Poroshenko and a lot of other people that got money?
There's a lot of people. If this case gets uncovered the real way, a lot of people are going to go down politically, and they're going to go to jail. That's what everybody's afraid of, starting from Poroshenko and then with the Democrats here in Washington.
Because of the way this money was handled. This money didn't go to the government of the Ukraine. This went first, really, it didn't really go to, but it got directed by the United States Embassy in Kyiv. So they said where it would go. Most of it did not directly go to the agency for which it was intended. It went through an NGO. I have a chart on the board there, which you'll be able to see. And we have on one side intended, on the other side actual. And that $4 million actually was for a program. And the program was to improve, I think it was the special prosecutor's office. Get them better desks, better furniture, more secure equipment, a whole host of things. So you would think that it would follow that red line there, where the $4 million would go from the U.S. to the proper agency in the Ukrainian government, and then it would go to the general prosecutor. That's what GP stands for, general prosecutor. And then he would spend the money for the improved equipment in the prosecutor's office so they could do better investigations of corruption. That was the whole purpose of it. It's really interesting that money that was intended to fight corruption was subjected to corruption. I mean, the Obama administration had no shame, which is why if you pay attention to this and you follow this investigation all the way through, it'll turn out the Obama administration was probably the most corrupt in American history. I mean, this is truly the tip of the iceberg, but it's so clear it's easy to see. Now, this is what actually happened to it, according to the witnesses in the documents. This is what actually happened to it. The $4 million was not sent to the Ukraine. I'm not sure it was sent to the embassy, but the embassy directed it to an NGO, not a non-government organization, of which they have many in Europe. And the ones that were utilized by our embassy, again, based on witnesses and documents, were all either Soros-dominated NGOs or what they considered and described as children of Soros, meaning they were a very left-wing. Very left-wing. And in Europe, if you're left-wing, you're kind of like, I think I described it once where I said, you're off the cliff. I mean, you're supporting things like socialism, communism, end of any military, who knows what other what kind of social programs you're supporting. And by the way, those NGOs, left, all hate America. We could describe them as a hate America club. America is racist. America is greedy. America is terrible, terrible, terrible. And they go through the same routine that Black Lives Matter and Antifa go through. You know, George Washington was corrupt, and Abraham Lincoln was corrupt, and on and on and on. So our money is going to that NGO. Now, the purported reason for it is the NGO is going to help guide the proper expenditure of the money for the general prosecutor. But notice with the yellow line that there was $4 million involved, and only $2 million gets to the general prosecutor to improve their corruption function. Gee, you say, where's the other $2 million? Well, we'll just go a little further down, and that one stayed with the NGO. That was their commission, half. And that $2 million got laundered, some of it, and went to certain very wealthy Ukrainians as sort of a kickback. And some of it was spent on very lavish gifts. Now, just to make this worse, you would say, well, this must be a Ukrainian NGO that helps to guide the general prosecutor's office. No, that NGO was an Italian NGO. It just happened to be one that was very, very left-wing, and they owed them a favor, probably for supporting something they desperately needed, like saying at the right time that Shokin was corrupt when Shokin was fired by Biden. And the support for that, when they say there's a lot of support for that, came from NGOs, most of which were involved in corrupt relationships with both the embassy and parts of the Ukrainian government. That is the typical scheme of what happened to the $5.3 billion that was never investigated. And you can see why it was never investigated, because it'd all go back where it says U.S. there. You can just substitute Obama administration, and the question would be, how much of this happened? Well, at least $3 billion worth. A lot more, by the way. Who knew about it? Who was involved in it? And who let our money get stolen? Well, the answers to all those. They all come back to members of the Obama administration. Then there'd even be a bigger question, and maybe somebody would want to take a look at Joe Biden's superintendency of this program. At that time, he was the guy in charge of making sure this all happened correctly. And $3 billion of our dollars went missing. That's one heck of a point, man, isn't it? This is a good time to take a short break.
Hey, I just read an unbelievable article in the Epoch Times. Take a look. It's an investigation into the mysterious origins of the...
When your life is in chaos, your home is your safe haven, your most valuable asset. And for pennies a day, Home Title Lock protection using the promo code Rudy. Investigation, the crooks in the Obama administration, including the ambassador, the woman who testified and claimed to be a saint. Turns out, boy, she's pretty crooked. Biden, this thing is all buried, right? Until I started investigating this case in order to help clear my client of the phony charges of being involved in Russian collusion, because some Ukrainians came to me after having been turned down by the Southern District of New York, and they gave me evidence of collusion by the Ukrainian government with the Democratic National Committee, Hillary Clinton including money that was paid to them to get dirty information on Trump and Manafort and Donald Trump Jr. Some of that information, some of that corroborated by documents that you've seen. You can see them again. Some of it corroborated by direct witnesses, more than one. And this information about that, and information about Joe Biden's corruption in Ukraine, and the fact that there were 5 witnesses willing to come to the U.S. who were all Ukrainian officials willing to testify, was given to the U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York 2 months before they came to me. And he's the one who investigated Michael Cohen and then turned out to investigate President Trump for 2 years and a half, leaked information on him, and never indicted him for anything. He turned down this investigation. He didn't do it. He was brought by a responsible lawyer, evidence of all this, and he turned it down. He might have found out about the $5.3 billion that was missing. Well, he didn't. I got the information. I cataloged it. Gave it to the State Department. The State Department buried it, as everybody else did, because they're all afraid to investigate it. Because if they investigate it, they will do to them what they've done to me, which is to attack me every day relentlessly, set out and investigate me for everything imaginable, all of it made up. So when I made my trip to the Ukraine, where I came back with a lot of very damning information, I believe it was Mr. Durkash, who's the head of the Committee on Accountability, handed me this document, and he said, probably somebody in your government has this buried somewhere, but this is the report of how much money is missing, and let me assure you, it's a lot more money than this. This is the tip of the iceberg. I said, well, the tip sounds awfully big to me. It's $3 billion American dollars unaccounted for. And what the chamber had recommended, of course, was an investigation. Well, during the corrupt Poroshenko administration, they stopped the investigation, not to protect themselves, but to protect their co-conspirators, the Biden administration, because there was a great deal of corruption that went on between Poroshenko himself and members of the Biden administration, including Joe Biden. So when they were told to stop it, they got the message. And we can look at this. Poroshenko had no sense that it implicated him, but if we go into it, we'll implicate our friends. Well, Poroshenko was defeated, and this remained dormant. New president took over. The new president wants to try to clean up this mess, and this was brought to him. This has nothing to do with any conversations with President Trump or me or anyone else. We never knew about this. He was given this, and he did what any reasonable president would do. He said, okay, we're going to investigate it. And he has already begun to investigate it. And a few months ago, there was a major arrest made in this case in which 2 people were arrested. And the 2 people are very, very close to George Soros. And the organizations involved are all organizations that were sponsored by George Soros. That shows how that $5.3 billion, that as yet unaccounted for $5.3 billion, that the Obama administration halted the investigation of, that is one of numerous cases of exactly how the money was stolen or misappropriated. There are other 20 active investigations. This one has resulted in indictment and ongoing proceedings. But there are another 20 cases involving different kinds of allegations of corruption, and it's a good head start in locating a lot of the $3 billion of American money. And I have them here. I have a listing of those and a chart of those. And I would say that there is one common denominator in all of these cases. And it would be very, very surprising. Very surprising, I guess, to some of you, not to me, because the party has become completely corrupt, that every single one of them involves either a Democratic office holder or a major contributor to the Democratic Party. I don't see any variations of that. I'll give you some of the names. The brother of Veronica Escobar, the congresswoman from El Paso, he's involved in one the Agility Corporation that got $3 million. They can't figure out what that was spent for. There was another one involving an assistant to Pat Schroeder from Colorado, another Democrat for a long time. That's a big one, big $35 million project that also appears to involve as Senior Vice President Bobby Herman, who was a senior advisor to Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. That would be the Clinton administration. Then there's one involving Thomas A. Dine, who worked for both Senator Edward Kennedy and Senator Frank Church. Supervisory board member Jan Kalicki was an advisor to Ted Kennedy. And then Anders Ausland of the Atlantic Council, which is really a creature of the Democratic Party. They were all involved in this, what looks to be about $19.4 million that has gone unaccounted for, including Lee Hamilton, who used to be a Democratic congressman, and I believe he was one of the co-chairmen of the 9/11 Commission. And then Thomas Fiala, who was a business partner of George Soros. I mean, this is, it's filled. One of the boards also includes former Vice President Mondale. So when Teleshenko says, and you will go back on the tape, I hope, and read this, that if this is fully investigated, which it has been blocked so far by the Obama administration, there will be many Ukrainians who will go to jail, but there also will be plenty of people in Washington, and he emphasizes Democratic people in Washington who will have to be prosecuted. Is that the reason why there's such reluctance in Ukraine to really dig into this case, and that it's going to uncover Poroshenko and a lot of other people that got money?
There's a lot of people. If this case gets uncovered the real way, a lot of people are going to go down politically, and they're going to go to jail. That's what everybody's afraid of, starting from Poroshenko and then with the Democrats here in Washington.
That's, of course, if we are capable of prosecuting Democrats, because for the last 4 or 5 years, it seems that we only prosecute Republicans. We let Hillary get away with 33,000 emails, and we let Biden get away with a lifetime of his family selling his office for millions and millions of dollars. But if you want to take a better look at this, I'm going to recommend a way to do it, so you can go into more detail on this and see that there's that what I'm telling you is backed up by proof. The first episode that you could go to would be episode number 9. It's called The Blockbuster Report and the Rape of Ukraine. And if you just write this down so you don't have to see the whole thing, 3316. That's 33 minutes and 16 seconds into the podcast. We start the discussion of the distribution of foreign aid, and the embassy deciding that the NGOs would distribute it. This was an interview with Mr. Durkash, who is chairman of the Parliamentary Committee on Accountability and an expert on this subject, who has gone through all the documents and takes you through it. The first half refers to the Biden criminality. The second half, the 3316, refers to what happened with this money, this $5.3 billion. He says it was diverted largely for 2 purposes: politically corrupt purposes, pay off politicians, and then to enrich already rich oligarchs. They got some of it, Soros people related to Soros, and then also American politicians. He said the only NGOs that we used for this kind of distribution were NGOs that were associated with Soros or children of Soros. And then he describes, because it was a newly breaking case at the time, the Shabunin case involving the HIV network that I talked about. He gives direct evidence. About it. If you go to number 10, that's episode 10, and you go to 3352, you'll see another discussion with documents about the accounting chamber document, what it contains, the allegations, how the investigation was thwarted, how NABU was turned from an agency that was going to fight corruption into a corrupt agency under these two people that just got indicted. Not only was one of them put on the board, both of them were put on the board, and they were both stealing money at the time they were on the board. And then it talks about something I'm sure Democrats would not like you to read, which is how much things have straightened out in terms of accountability since President Trump has come into office, and how it is helping to some extent to restore the reputation of the United States, which took a terrible beating because of the Biden corruption. You know, we I guess in America don't understand it as well because the corrupt media has covered it up. But in Ukraine, it's well known that he was being paid by the most crooked man in Ukraine to kill the case on that man. He was being paid by Zlochevsky, that his son was just a figurehead, that money was for Joe, and that it was for Joe to come in and kill the case when it was necessary, which Joe did in November of 2016, which earned him at least, he and his family, $8 million. Probably now they're up to about $14 million in money they're tracing. They think they might get even higher than that. And so that's one part of it. This is the other part of it, which is the $5.3 billion, $3 billion of which was American money that went missing while he was supposed to be watching our money. Obviously, he was counting his own money rather than watching our money. Then if you go to episode 11, that's probably the most comprehensive discussion of it, because it has as a witness Andrei Derkosh, who is an expert on this. And he takes you all through it, from the report being written in December of 2017, the fact that it was suppressed for years, that anybody who talked about it was in deep trouble with the embassy, that their visa would be stricken, taken, so they couldn't get to the United States and tell anybody about it, that this is one of the things that the Ukrainian officials wanted to tell the United States Attorney in the Southern District of New York, Berman, who summarily turned them down, as well as the allegations of Biden's corruption and interference in the election. One wonders if he had taken that meeting and gone ahead and interviewed these people, if the U.S. attorney there, instead of spending a year and a half on a phony case against Trump that went nowhere, might have actually been able to prosecute some real criminals. But they were Democrats, and I forgot, you don't prosecute them without being attacked by the hometown newspaper, the New York Times, and maybe Mr. Berman didn't want to be attacked. I mean, I don't know, but he turned down what would be considered a massive scandal, including this one that only tangentially involves Biden. But the Biden corruption was pretty strong, and it was long before he ever was going to run for president. Then Mr. Derkosh goes into a little bit more detail on the case involving the supplying of medicines and how the medicines were overpriced, and that provided room for a kickback. And the ultimate result is this agency that was formed for the laudable purpose of helping people with HIV/AIDS. When you went around and checked with the different people who actually do the work, say they contributed little or nothing, and often got their agencies into hot water because they would involve and insist on, more money being paid than they had to pay, and also fraudulent books and records. This investigation is just beginning. There are 19 other cases to go. Some of them are now at the stage where arrests are going to be made. It's all well and good. Ukraine's doing its job, but why is this still ignored in the United States? Doesn't this deserve a headline? $5.3 billion in foreign aid unaccounted for in Ukraine. $3 billion identified as U.S. money. I would expect to see that in the Times or in the Washington Post. Buried. I'd expect to hear it on CNBC, NBC, CNN. The only place it's ever been reported is on Fox. I'd expect the Justice Department to jump all over it. They haven't. This is the double standard that we live with. It's terrible. A terrible thing. It's a terrible thing that embitters at least half of America, because there's no doubt if these allegations involve President Trump or a Republican, they'd have been investigated a long time ago. But President Trump didn't waste $3 billion American dollars, a lot of which went to crooks instead of people that needed it. Obama did, and Biden, and all those Democrats I mentioned. And they're protected. They're protected people. They're princes. That's got to end. As we're kind of being forced to rethink the good things about America because the Democrats and the hate groups are all banding together to try to get you to hate America, whether it's Christopher Columbus or George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or who we are as a people. One of the things we've always been in as a people is fair, equal justice under the law. This is totally unequal justice. And I really urge people responsible for this to develop a thick hide. If you investigate this, I guarantee you the New York Times will write an editorial saying you've politicized the Justice Department. You're politicizing the Justice Department by not investigating it because you're letting politics stop you from investigating real crime. And instead you get detoured like Berman did and the special prosecutor, and you investigate the Russian hoax. Gosh, they're trying to do another Russian hoax. You investigate a totally innocent conversation with the president of Ukraine when there's a totally corrupt conversation had by Biden, which you don't look at. You have got to change that. This election has to change that. America cannot allow two systems of justice, one for the people who the press likes and the other for the people that the press doesn't like. The press exists to inform the American people, not to make judgments about who's going to be punished and who isn't for crimes, and not to have that judgment exercised by their political biases. And it's time to crack right through that. And the only way to crack right through that is to indict these cases and prove it. And then to elect Republicans in November, really, more importantly, kick the Democrats out. The only way they're going to learn their lesson is if you kick them out. And they'll have to go into the wilderness and put their party back together again. That's how you can make this country honest again. Because you sure as hell not going to be the press that does it. Because they're involved in this. And they cover it up. And the prosecutors are trying, but they just don't have the courage to withstand the relentless onslaught of all the newspapers. Maybe they'll develop it if we keep urging them. I even have a medicine they can take that might help. But I'm counting on you, because I don't have to give you the medicine. The American people are bold, they're strong, and they're honest. And they're fair. And the Democratic Party has been anything but fair. And you want to know what you can do about it? It's real simple. Kick them out of office. Don't give them the House of Representatives. Vote for Republicans because you want to get rid of Nancy Pelosi, who's a big part of this cover-up. And her husband is worth millions. And nobody's ever asked, how did you make those millions, Nancy Pelosi's husband? You came from Baltimore, Nancy. A pretty corrupt place. You came out of politics in Baltimore, Nancy. The husband's making millions. Kick her out. Get her out. You'll see right away the Democrats will get together and say, how can we reform this? How can we go back to, having a moderate wing of our party, or at least doing some business with the other side so we can show accomplishments? That's what we need. So we're going to be back and review this Biden case in much more detail as we get closer to the election, because we've gathered more facts. We've been able to add more money to the bribery from witnesses, and we have a couple of twists in it that are quite dramatic. But I think the thing that's easier to focus on right away is let's get our $3 billion back. Or let's find out what happened to it and apply it to the right purposes in the Ukraine. But let's get it out of the hands of the people who stole it. Shouldn't we be doing that? Of course we should. And aren't we not doing it because we've been corrupted? That is correct. So we're going to keep on this, and we're going to keep after it. And you keep watching Common Sense. You're going to find out what happened to it. And I would like you to please communicate with me to my website, rudyscommonsense.com, and let me know what you think and how you think you can be helpful. We'll be back in a couple of days with another episode of Rudy's Common Sense. Thank you very much for your attention.